Welcome to On to Better Things, the Portland Chapters. I'm your host, Frank Culbertson, and this is the podcast that looks back at wrestlers who came through the Portland sports arena on their way to bigger stages. From brief runs to breakout moments, we'll tell the stories of how Portland shaped wrestling history and the names who moved on to leave their mark across the world. In December of 1981, Portland fans got their first look at a young wrestler named Dizzy Hogan, a man who would later become far better known as Brutus, the Barber Beefcake. Billed as Hulk Hogan's brother, Dizzy entered with some early wins over Art Cruz, Billy Whitecloud, and Terry Fargo. There were even teases that Hulk himself might come to Portland to team with him, though that never materialized. But Dizzy's momentum stalled. He slipped into the mid-card, losing to names like Curt Hennig, Steve Regal, Brett Sawyer, and Chris Adams. In his own book, Dizzy later suggested that with Buddy Rose as the booker at the time, he was never going to rise higher on the Portland cards. By 1982, Ed Leslie, Dizzy Hogan, was gone from the territory. But Portland was one of the earliest stops in her career that would eventually bring him national fame in the WWF. 4 years earlier, in 1977, Portland briefly hosted another wrestler who had the tools to be a star, Gino Hernandez. By the time he arrived, Gino already had credentials. He'd held the U.S. title in Detroit and the Texas tag titles with Jimmy Snuka earlier that year. In Portland, he debuted in September and was slotted into the mid-card. He picked up wins over Bobby Kincaid, Coco Samoa, and even one over Ed Wiskowski. But he also found himself in draws with Johnny Boyd, Dutch Savage, John Anson, and suffered losses to Wiskowski, Savage, and Snuka. And with Snuka, Dutch, and Lonnie Main occupying the top babyface spots, there simply wasn't room for Gino to climb. Some, like Bobby Bass Kincaid, later said Portland didn't use him right, but in a crowded territory, Gino simply slipped away. In other promotions, he rose higher, and his look and charisma carried him. Sadly, his story ended far too early. Gino Hernandez died in 1986 at just the age of 29 years old of a drug overdose. And then there's Buzz Sawyer, a man who would go on to be one of wrestling's great villains. Buzz arrived in November of 1980 as a preliminary babyface. He notched early wins over Tiny Anderson, Rocky De La Sera, Fidel Cortez, Chris Colt, Iger Volkov, and a young Tonga John, the future Barbarian. Teaming with Matt Bourne, Buzz formed a wild and rowdy duo. Though they won tag belts together in Mid-Atlantic and Texas, in Portland, they simply couldn't capture the straps. But with his younger brother Brett Hacksaw Sawyer, Buzz found gold. The two won the Northwest tag titles and held them for 2 months. Buzz briefly returned in 1982 to back Brett in his feud with Rip Oliver and the Assassin. Buzz's story ties directly to another name we've already covered, Terry Allen, later Magnum TA. Allen had paid Buzz to train him, but Buzz skipped town with the money. But when Allen showed up in Portland, Buzz reluctantly finished his training and helped him get booked. Buzz Sawyer's time in Portland was uneven, but it was part of the foundation that built his reputation as one of wrestling's toughest and wildest heels. Three very different careers. Dizzy Hogan, a young Ed Leslie, laying early groundwork before becoming Brutus Beefcake. Gino Hernandez, a talent Portland never fully tapped, who tragically passed too soon. And Buzz Sawyer, who arrived as a babyface, but grew into one of the sport's most notorious villains. All three spent time in the Northwest before moving on to better things. This series is based on the Encyclopedia of Portland Wrestlers by historian Mike Rogers, which is available now on Amazon. And I'm your host, Frank Culbertson, and this has been On to Better Things, the Portland Chapters. Be sure to follow the show on Spotify and Apple Podcasts so you don't miss a single episode. And new shows drop every Friday.